안녕. 안녕 술꾼이들. Oh, okay, heating up. I guess first mistake, not used to yet my 아직 새로운 어카운트를 공개 계정을 만들었다는 걸 깜빡했네요. 그렇게 열심히 홍보를 해놓고 이렇게 사람들이 왜 안 들어오나 했더니 yeah, Sarah, just to let you know, I actually started this live in my previous account, my personal account, and totally forgot about it until I think somebody realized that that was wrong. So thank you everybody for joining again. Woo, heating up. So today I have come back with a classic cocktail that maybe some of you have heard of before, some of you have not, but it is used, mainly starts and utilizes rye whiskey. Happy Friday. Yeah, happy Friday. Friday, I'm just like, woo. So I'll be utilizing rye whiskey, and also it includes rinsing the glass with absinthe, or this is anise liqueur, or I have, just because for convenience of rinsing out the glass, I put this in a little bottle separately so that I could kind of squeeze it out in a more convenient way. So you will see this later, how it's easy to use these kind of like bottles that just squirt it out. So I use these kind of bottles to maybe store syrups, or utilize these when I'm, I guess, storing juice like lime juice or lemon juice if I'm preparing for a party and I don't want to be constantly squeezing out citrus throughout the whole party. So these very light, very convenient, has a little cap, highly recommend. Okay, so I have brought to you here my somewhat dwindling amount of whiskeys. So this is a rye whiskey that has been gifted to me by my no longer roommate, but once roommate, owner of the famous Pablo, the cat. And it is a rye made in Utah. So I guess a lot of the distiller, one thing about I heard about whiskeys is that most of them are not immediately appropriate for consumption, and usually age it for a couple of months in oak barrels. So at least 2 years most of the time. And that's why creating whiskey distilleries takes a lot of money, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of upfront sunk costs that makes it extremely difficult to create or build new distilleries. I think that's why you see a lot of, I guess, first-time distillers creating gin, because gin you don't need to age. You can use a lot of different things to produce gin, of course any kind of alcohol, but mostly also gin. So whiskeys definitely takes more effort, more time, upfront cost. And you can see here, I think a lot of American distilleries, what I heard, suffered a lot during the Prohibition. So afterwards, it's still hard to say, other than like the Kentucky ones, which I think a lot of them survived throughout Prohibition. But a lot of the distilleries in the US, it's only, I guess, less than a century ago. So there's still, for instance, if you look at this, it says that they have sourced their whiskeys from a couple of other distilleries and blended them. So it takes time to kind of build your own distillery and create your own whiskey that is purely yours, that you produced, that you aged. So that's kind of something that I have realized and wanted to note. So this is from Utah, and this is another one that I bought at, oops, this is not. This is a whiskey that I bought in Union Square Farmers Market, and this is from Hudson Valley. And this has kind of like a very grassy note to it. It says it's made out of, so I guess one thing to say about rye whiskey is that it's a type of whiskey, and it has more rye, I think at least 50% rye in the mix. It's like barley, you can make it from grain, you can make it out of corn, but this is, I think, at least over a certain percentage amount of rye, which I think gives it a little bit spicier note. this compared to this rye, this is a little bit, I think, full-bodied, but this has a little bit grassier flavor. That this says it was like malted rye, which they kind of try to explain to me why it's definitely different, not your usual rye. So it's a little bit more of a sipping whiskey, even though I sometimes mix it in cocktails. And this is also, somebody left it at my place, so now I claim it to be mine. So this is a different type of whiskey. It's a bourbon whiskey, in which has more corn in the mix. It's slightly sweeter, and usually a lot of bourbon distilleries, what they do is they age it in charred oak barrels, which give it kind of like a burnt caramel, that kind of sweetness to it that, of course, is a little bit distinctive from bourbon. So it's a good, like, if you're starting off drinking whiskey, it's like, you know, starting with bourbon is also kind of a safe choice. And now, this is mine. So while I'm kind of like talking about this, I can kind of try to compare these two rye while tasting it. So I guess when I think about like whiskey, and when I first tasted whiskey was, of course, when I was in college and supposedly of legal age. I went to our neighborhood coffee shop called Amherst Coffee, and now you know where I went to college. There is a coffee shop called Amherst Coffee that did whiskey tasting. So it's like during the day, it's a cafe that you can study, and at night it would switch into a bar that serves you wine, whiskey, cocktails, beer, and they had this whiskey tastings that I remember trying, like the beginner tasting set, which would give you like a rye, I think a bourbon, and a scotch. So this scotch has appeared in my other lives in my personal account. And so scotch is from Scotland, and because I think it smokes the malted barley throughout some sort of the process, it has like a smoky, peaty flavor that's also very distinctive and very different. So I guess if you want like a summary, it would be like rye is a little bit more spicy, bourbon's a little bit sweet and rounder, and Scotch whiskey would be, I guess, smokier. So personal preference. Yeah, so this has kind of like a kick to it at the end. Yeah, and both have a kick, but this has like a higher ending note, kind of almost like a tequila grassiness to it. Both of them are, I think, pretty good, but I've heard some people don't like this one. Okay, so what I'm making today is pretty simple in its ingredients. It's the whiskey, so pick a nice whiskey that you like. I'm sure some of you ask, what is a nice whiskey? And I would say, drink it, try what you like. Maybe go with like the bigger distilleries, which have been around for a while, so I would just drink what you like, but in the end you're going to be drinking it, and for this cocktail the whiskey is what is driving the flavor, so I would want you to use something that you like.
What is the difference between blended and single malt?
Blended means single malt means it was produced in one distillery, I think, and then blended means it was produced in multiple distilleries and it was blended together. And a lot of distilleries, is it blending room, or I'm not sure if it's the distillery or the blending room. I'm like blanking on that. But so blended means you are mixing a couple different types of whiskey, and single is that, you know, one distillery or one distilling room. I'm like blanking on that. That is produced from, I guess, one distillery or one distilling room. So I guess a lot of people think single malt is better a lot of times because, you know, they think it has higher quality control. They have, like, I guess, higher faith in that sole producing single malt whiskey. But, you know, I think in the end, blended whiskey has its own merit. It could be a little bit more, usually, a bit milder in flavor, probably a bit more consistent, because single malt, if you're blending different types of whiskey, you can taste it while you're blending it. So you can kind of create a consistency of flavor that you would want and that you like, and that flavor profile, if it's distinctive of your distillery, you would want to like continue that. So some people like that as well. So of course, single malt is generally more expensive. Hopefully that answers your question. So, okay, back to our cocktail. So you can, starting point, so it's very similar to an old fashioned, which is you have like a little bit of sugar, or you can also use simple syrup, and you douse it with bitters. And of course you can use simple syrup to just make it, I guess, easier, because if you're using some sugar, you have to make sure that it's melted properly so that at the bottom of the glass you don't just have that grainy sugar underneath. So the cocktail is the Sazerac, and you usually utilize peychaud bitters is the one that is traditionally used. A lot of times in the recent bars, they add a little bit of angostura. And how much you douse the sugar with the bitters is personal choice. I would go for maybe 1, 2, 3. And maybe 2 of the angostura. And these are the, other than the absinthe, these are the only additions to the whiskey. You can kind of like muddle it. So, so in an old fashioned, you would have this sugar or simple syrup, and you would use angostura bitters to douse it and then blend it. So you don't use peychaud bitters, and usually in an old fashioned, and you add whiskey to that. And there's no juice, there's no aeration necessary for this cocktail. This is more about enjoying kind of like the richness of the whiskey, so you wouldn't shake it either. So I'm kind of making sure the brown sugar is melted properly. Just so that I don't see. And the Sazerac cocktail is, I think, historically known to be originated from the New Orleans. Hopefully, I don't know if anybody is from New Orleans who is watching this, but hopefully most of that city and the people are doing okay. And I heard that the hurricane is also coming to New York tomorrow, so hopefully everybody else is also okay. So making sure this is mixed. So New Orleans also, my college friends and I went for a graduation trip. I don't think we had a Sazerac there, but we had a lot of frozen cocktails that were selling on like the main street, which was also quite fun. Okay, so now the whiskey. So this time I'll be using this whiskey, since I think it's a little bit more, this is a little bit too edgy for this cocktail. And for some of them, some bartenders, they also mix in a little bit of cognac into it to also give it like a richer flavor. But today I'll be going with the more traditional route. And we will add ice. And I have chilled my glass. I got a little bit of space in my freezer, so I chilled my hefty glass. I guess before adding the ice. So I guess like stirring is also, this is not ideal because the bottom is a little bit narrower and you have like a separate stirring, I guess, cup for it. But I don't have that yet, so I'll be utilizing this. And just while you would want to squirt a little bit into it and then also kind of rinse it out so that it's ready. So I'm kind of like rinsing all the sides out so that none of it is missed. And you can smell it constantly while you are drinking the cocktail. And getting ready the lemon twist. When are we doing the shaker? This is not shaker. This is a stirred cocktail. Maybe that's a different question. Shaker 09, shaker 01. kind of confused. Okay, that's enough. Pour it out. So I guess I thought chilling this glass is way more important because I think traditionally this is not served over ice. So you would want it to be really, really cold. So kind of like spritz the oil on top. So you can discard it or you can include it. I think you can go either way. I'll leave it on the side. So you see, because of the peychaud bitters, it's very kind of reddish color. 나 이해 못했어. 공구? shaker 공구? 아, 공구. Okay. Okay, I got it. 여러분, 멀티태스킹이 쉬운 게 아니에요. I guess this is like immediately you're like smelling a little bit of the lemon, a little bit of the absinthe, but also tasting the whiskey. Yeah, so it's over like, I guess one good way to think about it is like you're layering flavors by sugar and then bitters, and then you rinse the glass with absinthe, and then you kind of spritz the oil on top of the cold cocktail. 주연아, 너도 1살 차이밖에 안 나. So 그게 옛날 사람이라서 이해를 못하는 건가? 그건 아닌 것 같은데. 얼마나 썰렁 유머에 익숙해졌냐에 따라 아닌가? So I think if you don't like absinthe, you wouldn't like it. I think what I could have done differently is that maybe add like a dash less of peychaud bitters. But I think overall it's a pretty complex kind of cocktail. I don't know why the thumb is not totally up. Yeah, it's kind of like rich, spicy, spiciness not just coming from the rye, but it's also coming from the bitters, which it's like a great sipping cocktail that you can kind of like enjoy maybe after dinner or, yeah, after dinner for me. Maybe it's a bit too strong for some people, but yeah, it's kind of like 본연의 위스키 맛을 살리는 약간 그런 칵테일에 약간 스파이스를 잔뜩 얹은 그런 느낌의 사즈락 칵테일을 오늘 준비해봤어요. 약간 뉴올리언스가 무사하기를 바라고 뉴욕도 무사하기를 바라고 다 함께 언제 여행할 수 있는 날이 빨리 오기를. 약간 음미하면서 좀 많이 생각을 해볼 수 있는 그런 칵테일 같아요. 약간 명상까지는 아니지만 미래에 대해 생각? 다음에 이제 월요일 날 이제 볼 텐데 월요일에는 꼭 이 YG Happy Hour 계정으로 컴백을 하도록 할게요. So hi Mike and bye Mike. bye 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 술꾼이들.